Now, let's discuss this further. We're joined by Julia Chaskalson, Section 27's Communication Officer. Julia, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This is, I would imagine, good news, but what exactly does it mean?
Thanks, Anati, and good afternoon to your listeners and viewers at home. So this court order was the result of a settlement between the Department of Basic Education and the provincial education departments with ourselves, Section 27, and our partners, Equal Education and the Equal Education Law Centre. So this settlement essentially says that the National School Nutrition Program has to be responsive to the needs of learners during the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that millions of learners are attending school on a rotational basis, and sometimes schools close because of COVID-19 infections. And what we want is a national school nutrition program that responds to these challenges, but still succeeds at providing over 9.5 million learners with a daily school meal, either in the form of a hot meal that they collect at school through scholar transport, or in the case that has been done in some provinces, the collection of food parcels for the days that learners are not at school. So we're very hopeful that the settlement, which became a court order, will result in more learners receiving the meals that they are constitutionally entitled to. We know that ever since the COVID-19 pandemic hit South Africa and schools closed, we know that more than 1.5 million learners were not receiving the meals that they were entitled to. So this is an important step for reaching the learners that the NSNP has been failing to reach until this point.
So if you're saying that at the time that the Department of Basic Education stopped these very vital meals in March of 2020, 1.5 million learners were not receiving the meals. I know that with this particular judgment, it says that there are actually or essentially 9 million children who need these meals. So where were the rest getting the meals from? And also if you can unpack what this judgment says in terms of the Basic Education Minister drawing up this 1-month plan and 8 other provinces. Which provinces are these, and which is the other province I would assume has been giving these children the basic food that they need?
So together with our partners, Equal Education and the Equal Education Law Centre, we took the education authorities to court in July of last year for abruptly suspending the school nutrition program when schools closed and making no plans to reach learners with the nutrition that we know that millions of them need. And over the course of this past year, Wanati, there has been some increase in the uptake of the National School Nutrition Program, but over the course of the past 6 months, the program has still failed to meet to deliver these meals to more than 1.5 million learners. So while there was some improvement, the department was consistently failing to reach all the learners who needed it with the meals. And we know that this has a knock-on effect for entire families. If learners aren't being fed at school, it puts additional pressure on caregivers or parents who then have another mouth to feed at home. So the 1.5 million learners is quite a recent statistic that comes from March of this year. But in terms of what the department now has to do, the settlement says that within 1 month, the Department of Basic Education and these 8 provincial MECs for education must develop revised and realistic plans for the delivery of the National School Nutrition Program in this context that take into consideration the challenges that learners have accessing meals on the days that they might be at home because they are rotating their timetables. So these plans have to have clear timeframes and they have to be responsive and practical given our context. Repeatedly over the past year, Section 27 and Equal Education and the Equal Education Law Centre have tried to point out to the department how learners are struggling to access food. Many learners haven't been receiving food on the days that they are at home due to this rotational timetabling system. But the departments have repeatedly ignored suggestions about providing scholar transport or food parcels or food vouchers. So within 1 month, the department and the 8 MECs have to develop these new plans which take into consideration these suggestions and essentially find ways of reaching all the learners who need the program. We can't have business as usual with feeding children when schools aren't operating as usual. In terms of the last provincial MEC, the Western Cape Department of Education never really suspended the National School Nutrition Program, and their uptake of the program and providing meals to learners has been consistently quite good over the past year. So that's part of the reason why they weren't included in this reinstitution of legal proceedings, which we started last year. But the other provinces all have some distance to go in terms of reaching all of the learners who need and benefit from the program.
So the Western Cape Education Department was the only department that was feeding 100% of these meals to the children that needed it in all the sectors and regions in that province.
So essentially, when schools closed last year and there was this abrupt kind of suspension of the National School Nutrition Program in March of last year, the Western Cape was one of the only provinces who continued feeding learners, either through the delivery of, in most cases in Western Cape schools, if I'm not mistaken, it was learners being allowed to bring a Tupperware to school to collect a hot meal and then take it home with them, even on the days that they weren't at school because of these rotating timetables. So the Western Cape has shown that there are ways and systems of communicating with school communities to say, hey, meals are available to you. And we want the rest of the departments and the national department to develop these systems of communicating with parents and learners to say you are entitled to come in for a school meal even if you aren't attending school on a particular day. We want systems for scholar transport, and also essentially directions from the Department of Basic Education on how to deliver the National School Nutrition Program in these changing times. I think a lot of provinces have struggled to get over, or rather to reach all of the learners who need the program because many learners aren't attending school physically every single day. And we know when learners go back to school next week, that many will still be rotating. So essentially, we've asked for the department to draft a set of directions or guidelines for provincial education departments, perhaps based on the Western Cape's models, on how to communicate effectively with school communities about how to access meals and how to make sure that meals are reaching the 9 million learners who need them.
Julia, very quickly before I let you go, you mentioned that the department has 1 month. So when is D-Day for them to submit this report? And also the court, as you've also rightfully pointed out, says this document has to be revised. It also has to be realistic and practical. What are some of the practical steps that you'd like to see the department implement that may very well not be contained in that report?
So we've been working on the settlement order, negotiating with the legal teams of the department and the provincial education departments for several weeks now, since we first reinstituted proceedings in June of 2021. And essentially, the settlement was made a court order on this past Tuesday, which I believe was the 20th of July. So they have a month from the 20th of July to come up with new plans for the NSNP. And what we're hoping for is that the department kind of comes up with clear deliverables in terms of the provision of scholar transport to help learners get to school on the days that they aren't physically attending in the classroom so that they can collect a meal. Or if that isn't the case, to properly investigate costs and come up with systems for delivering food parcels to learners for the days that they aren't at home. Some provinces, including the Northern Cape and Mpumalanga, have experimented with this food parcel system, and it's shown that it's very effective at getting the nutrition to learners who need it on the days that they aren't at school. So we want a kind of a set of directions which show departments how to go about procuring enough food for food parcels, either or alternatively providing scholar transport so that learners can actually go into school to collect the meals that they are entitled to, even if they're at home that day.
Julia, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We'll definitely be in touch after a month and just to see if indeed the Basic Education Department has submitted that report and that 1.5 million children who have not been getting those meals eventually and finally do get them. Thank you so much for your time. Julia Chaskalson from Section 27.